Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Wine and Web 3. I'm your host, Jana Kreilein, certified wine geek and co-founder of dVIN Labs. This week, we're bringing back a live conversation from the iconic Bar Lulu in Sydney, Australia. This was recorded at one of Real Vision's most vibrant community events, and we are resurfacing it now because it couldn't be more relevant. So as RWAs go mainstream and tokenization becomes the new frontier for capital markets, wine is emerging as one of the most compelling use cases out there. In this episode, you'll hear from David Garrett, my fellow co-founder at dVIN Labs, alongside Raoul Pal, CEO and founder of Real Vision, and Jamie Coutts, Real Vision's chief crypto analyst. Here's the TLDR in case you don't have time to stick around for the whole episode, because this one is packed with signal. So wine is one of the most overlooked but powerful real-world assets, and tokenization is unlocking access, price discovery, and new levels of liquidity. dVIN is tackling the structural inefficiencies across a $1 trillion asset class, delivering solutions for provenance, anti-counterfeit protection, and end-to-end supply chain data. But maybe most importantly, investing in wine means investing in culture, right? It's about more than what's in the bottle. It's about story and status and identity, and now on-chain participation. So this episode was recorded in 2024, but if you're watching the RWA space in 2025, you will understand that this is basically a cheat sheet for where things are headed. So let's get into it.
Here we go.
There we go. Sue's taking on.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks very much for being here, everyone. This is a fantastic reception. We actually have brought in a lot more people than what we thought. We've got standing room only, so fantastic. We've got a great discussion today. I think we've got these two gentlemen. We're going to get very much a deep dive into the wine industry, and I think walk away with a greater appreciation of the wine industry, hopefully. My name is Jamie Coutts. I'm the Chief Crypto Analyst at Real Vision, and we are here today at Bar Lulu in Sydney, and actually in the Rocks District. So for those of you that are streaming in or watching this a little bit later, this is an amazing location in Sydney, overlooking the magnificent Sydney Harbour, although not today with the rain that we've had in recent days, but nevertheless, a fantastic venue. This is an event that has been organised by Real Vision here in Australia. Raoul was just informing me a moment ago that this is actually the third largest Real Vision community in the world. So, and it's evident here today. So, Major Duffels from the RV community has been instrumental in putting this together. Thanks, James. And also special mention to Not Centralized, Mark Manford up the back there, and his team have been absolutely fantastic in bringing all the technical skills to get this off the ground. So thank you very much, Mark. Okay, so look, I mean, this discussion today is, of course, about how blockchain is going to completely transform the global wine industry. In the process, we're going to go through the ins and outs of a brand new protocol that's going to pioneer and lead this effort. And of course, we have David Garrett, who's the co-founder of that protocol, dVIN. We're going to learn a lot more about that today. And of course, we have this gentleman here, Raoul Pal, CEO of Real Vision, also a macro crypto strategist, part-time, full-time wine connoisseur, and also, if you've been watching his AMAs for like the last 2 years, some kind of roasted nut connoisseur. The follow-up to this one will be about tokenizing nuts. So, look, both of you gentlemen obviously are quite well known, to put it lightly. David, after the event yesterday where you were kind enough, through your extensive network of some of Australia's most famous winemakers and sharing some gorgeous Australian red wines, rekindled my belief in Australian red wines after all these years. It's pretty evident to me that your background, which we're going to get into in tech, then in wine, now back to tech and wine, bringing it all together, means that you've got this amazing community around you and people know you quite well. And Raoul, you touched down in Australia last night and the immigrations officer knew who you were. He said, am I going to quote this correctly? He said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to fuck this up. I'm a Real Vision subscriber."
But he put his hand on my shoulder. I thought, I'm going to be arrested. What have I done? I thought, did I bring a banana in? Anyway.
Australia, for those of you, I mean, most of us here are actually from Australia, so this is pretty well known. Australian immigration officers are not known to be nice.
No.
They're pretty brutal usually. So you've got
a
to
bag full of bananas for bananas. he didn't stop me somehow.
I'm sure that wouldn't have raised any questions. Okay, so look, let's dive into it. But before we do, can you guys just maybe share something about yourselves that people here don't know about you? And look, it doesn't have to be embarrassing, okay? Although you are in Australia, so this is the land of self-deprecating humor. So if it is embarrassing, we will appreciate it more than anyone else. It doesn't have to be embarrassing though, but maybe if you could just share something about yourself that people don't know from your public persona. David, I'll start with you because Raoul's thinking about this.
I know what I'm going to tell you, and I don't want to tell you.
Something embarrassing. Well, look, first let me say thank you to everybody here. Thank you to the Real Vision community. You guys have been, fantastic on 4 continents now. And I really appreciate the really warm welcome that we've received here in Australia. We had planned to do this event and then ended up doing overflow events yesterday and today. So we've really appreciate the warm welcome. Something from my background. I mean, look, I have lived in 5 continents. I've lived in probably 20, 30 cities around the world. I've been fortunate to make wine or be part of a winemaking process in 2 continents. But the truth is, I didn't start any of that until I was almost 30. I didn't have a passport until I was 26. Didn't get on an airplane until I was 20. So I'm really making up for lost time now, and I appreciate even more the ability to go to fantastic places and meet fantastic people. I don't know if that was what you were looking for, but
Yeah, that'll do. Thank you.
Okay. Is this one working? Can you hear me all right? Use this one. So I'm going to give you my most embarrassing story, just because it's you, Jamie, and I haven't seen you, and I want to give you the story. And because, this is not going to get out of this room, right? So I was 14 years old. Do I want to do this? So I was 14 years old, and I've always loved clothes. And when we grew up, you'd go to the shopping mall, it was called the Precinct, and we'd all get together and you'd meet as 14-year-olds and try and check out the girls and find out where the party might be. But as 14, you didn't really do much partying, but you were kind of getting interested in that. You'd have this weird kind of shuffling disco with the girls on one side of the room and boys on the other. And it was the time I had gone to my mum and said, listen, I really want this pair of jeans. And the time they were baggy jeans, but they were tight around the ankles, and I got big feet. And so I'd gone into the store the week before. It's called Huggy Bear. It's like this bizarre little shop that sold jeans in the shopping mall. And I went in and I found the jeans I wanted, and they were expensive. They were like £30, which it's like $300 jeans now. So Mum's like, well, you're going to have to do the lawnmower, you have to do all of this stuff. So anyway, I got the money. I went to buy this pair of jeans. Saturday, I went with a few of my friends into the store, found the jeans, got them, went to the back, and they had saloon doors on the changing rooms. And so I put the jeans on, struggled to get them over my feet because they're tight ankle, but that was the trend and I looked cool. I thought, yeah, this is great. I need to try the other pair to compare them. They're a bit cheaper, thought they might be cool. So then I tried to take the jeans off and I couldn't. They were stuck around my ankles. And I was kind of sweating and flapping around in this room when eventually the girl who was serving poked her head round. It's like, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. 5 minutes later, are you sure you're all right? I'm like, I can't get the jeans off. She's like, it's all right, don't worry. Just stick your legs under the saloon doors. Now, this was still in the back of the shop, so nobody could really see me. So I stick my legs out. She's like, okay. She starts pulling, she goes, no, they won't come off. She goes, hold on, and I'm going to really pull. Let me get the other girl. Now, I'm basically sitting in my pants in this changing cubicle. And they're like, okay, ready? 1. So this is a Saturday afternoon. All the girls are there, all the boys, they're all flirting, they're in the shop, they know I'm buying jeans, we're all going to go for a cup of tea afterwards or whatever. And so they're in the front of the shop. 1, 2, 3. I come straight through the saloon doors in my underwear at 14 years old, the most self-conscious human being in existence. And I come skidding through, the girls crash to the floor, everybody sees me. I'm like, oh my God, still couldn't get the jeans off. They eventually have to cut them off me in public, in front of all of my friends as a 14-year-old who was just discovering girls. So there you go, I've given you the story.
I was not expecting that.
I'm flush-faced now thinking about it. It's the horror.
That's going to be imprinted on my mind. I really wish I hadn't put that. Boxes or wide fronts?
It was pre-boxer stage. It was wide fronts. It was really bad.
It's the 80s.
Yeah.
All right, I don't know how we're actually going to get back on track after that one. That was definitely not rehearsed. Okay, so look, I mean, both of you gentlemen have very interesting backgrounds, let's say.
You just heard mine.
But listen, I mean, so David, you've got this, fantastic sort of background in tech. You've had one foot in tech and one foot in the wine world, and that's brought you to where you are today. And Raoul, I don't know if this is the right way to sort of frame what you do, but you'll move well beyond macro and crypto, and you're sort of at this intersection of those things plus societal change, technological change, lifestyle, wellness, and you're sort of seeing all these different patterns emerge. So I thought what I'd do is just start off, David, I want to hear about your Genesis story, and specifically, as we're here to talk about wine, why is it that wine is the passion that you've settled on in your life? Settled's not the right word, but the passion that you've found. And then Raoul, I think I want to talk to you about the importance of culture and societies as we move into this, what would you call it, technological frontier, this new age. So David, we'll start with you, and maybe you can tell and share for everyone here, what is that sort of Genesis story and why wine?
Sure. So I grew up in a little town in Michigan, in the U.S., and as I said, didn't do a lot of traveling when I was growing up. My parents were both teachers, and we lived a kind of normal U.S. middle-class life. But I did get a VIC 20 for my birthday when I was, I think, about 15 years old, and I think within a year I'd written a game program that took up more memory than would fit on the computer. So I spent a lot of time kind of early on doing self-taught coding, and then when I graduated from college, I moved to Washington D.C. and was kind of looking for a job. I did a stint as an intern on Capitol Hill. That didn't really take, but I had a great time, met some people, and we started a little company. That company was called Intraactive, and we built a bunch of intranets, and then ended up building the first intranet for the U.S. Navy. I got that contract when I was 24. That was back when it was really cool to be the greasy-haired kid in shorts with no shoes on in the office building, and they came in with the uniforms, and I did this crazy presentation on the whiteboard for them on how an intranet could solve problems for the U.S. Navy, and they gave us the contract. A couple of years later, I sold the company. I guess I was 28 at the time, and I had never really, I'd only left the United States one time. I think I'd been on an airplane twice, and I really wanted to see what the rest of the world looked like. I went to Cusco and hiked the Inca Trail. Ended up staying there for almost a year, and then made my way to Argentina, and basically took all the money that I made from selling my company and dumped it into a vineyard and a winery in Mendoza. At that time, there was no Real Vision. So I wasn't getting great financial advice. I didn't really understand long-term investing, although I did understand currency debasement because I was in Argentina in 2002, and the vineyard that I bought was right across from this vineyard called Clos de los Siete, which was 7 French winemakers who bought a bunch of land in the Uco Valley. It was the first French winemakers to be in Argentina, and one of them was Michel Rolland, who was a famous winemaker, and in fact the only vineyard that he owned in the world was right there. So I knew that was the right place to buy. And when we bought it at about 10 cents on the dollar. 10 cents of what he had bought it 3 years earlier. We bought it for 10 cents on the dollar. The US dollar went a long way in Argentina in 2002. Unfortunately, all that money's still in Argentina. But it's just the way it goes. I kind of learned about the wine industry literally from the dirt up. We bought virgin land. The land was so rough when we bought it that the surveyor was on horseback. You couldn't drive on it. The first thing we built on the property was a giant grill, and we got that advice from our local partner who said, if you don't build a big barbecue, then you can't get anybody to work on your land. In Argentina, that's the case, and we cooked a hell of a lot of meat on that barbecue over the first couple of years. So the wine industry is really interesting. From the day we put our first dollar down to buy that land to the day we made our first dollar in revenue from selling wine from that land was 10 years. It took 2 years to clear the land, another year to put in the trellising system and the irrigation system, another 3 years before we got our first fruit. Then that fruit sat in the barrel for 2 years, and then in the bottle for 2 years, and then we sold it. So it's a long-term business. In the wine business, we think about economics in terms of generations, and that taught me a lot about business cycles. It taught me a lot about the value of patience. And more than anything, I think what it told me is the value of storytelling. And that's really how I fell in love with wine. I fell in love with telling the stories. I went from spending 16 hours a day in front of a computer coding to spending most of my time outdoors and maybe checking my email twice a week. And that was really interesting. I did miss it after a while, and I went back and did some more tech projects. We built one of the first iPad wine lists about 10 or 15 years ago. And in fact, I moved to Hong Kong and built out that business in Hong Kong, Singapore, Macau, Tokyo. If any of you have ever been to a restaurant in Asia with an iPad wine list, it was probably tech that I built back in 2010. But I think that kind of what made me fall in love with wine was the storytelling. I love the stories, and I think that we always say at dVIN, every bottle tells a story, and what we've done with the technology that we built for dVIN is tried to help winemakers tell those stories to wine lovers.
Well, we're definitely going to get into that, so thanks very much for sharing. Raoul, this whole concept of community, look what you've done here with Real Vision globally, but the idea about cultural memes or major sort of societal groups, communities, and what that means going forward, because it's certainly going to be a different frontier that we're moving into now. And I mean, maybe you can speak to that, because I just don't see how, there is this intimate connection between wine and community, wine and society, and the impact that it's had.
So if you think of a bottle of...
I actually want to hear this.
You don't know anything about wine. Sit down. He's the guy who supplied all the wines last night. He's all right. Wine is a conversation David and I had that kind of unlocked a lot of thinking only the other day. Wine is fermented grape juice. big deal. Tastes nice? Okay, fine. What wine really is, as Dave said, is storytelling. It's culture in a bottle. You know, I push back, and we were talking to Peter about this last night, I pushed back really hard on the Robert Parkerization of wine, who was this US wine critic who said it's not about where the wine is from, it's about the grape. Like, no, it's not. It's nothing to do with that. It's the culture of the land, it's the soil, it's the people, it's the stories that are told, it's the 10,000 years of wine, right? It's culture. Australian wine is a different culture than Spanish wine or French wine. The people, the reasons, what they eat with it, what it means to get together, right? Wine is like one of these most communal things. Food and wine, it's like epic. And they create community around it. And so it's incredibly valuable because if you think of a wine bottle, it's like an NFT. It is a tokenized culture, and you can store it for extended periods of time. And like, if you get your cultural meme right, it's worth more. Is that particular wine, Mouton Rothschild, worth $20,000 a bottle? No, but it is to people. There's a consensus mechanism based around value, right? Which we all understand. This is the world that we live in. This is how humans operate. So humans operate in communal consensus based around value or values, societal values. And wine is one of those things. And we see it shifting in many other things, but culture is one of those things that combines humanity and gives us a set of rules, a set of ways of existing. Australian culture, like you guys drink beer for breakfast. It's abhorrent, but that's your culture and I'll go with it. You know, I rag people about all the time on the Journeyman because because we actually all love each other's cultures because they're kind of weird and they're kind of quirky. And we've now empowered culture in this new technological age where culture and brand, these things are attention, they are storytelling, and they can be now tokenized and they can be realizable. And I usually, the biggest example is Disney. Disney's what, $100, $200 billion company. It's not, its market cap is not really that big. Yeah, they've been struggling, whatever. What is the cultural value of Disney? It affects almost every human being on the planet. And so it's probably $1 trillion, $2 trillion. But we can't capture it because culture is not tangible on the balance sheet like brand isn't. So the tokenization revolution allows us to participate in that. Culture is so big that if you look at, a lot of people talk about, and I think it's the most mid-curve take, is we're going to tokenize finance. I'm like, that's small fry. You can add every single financial services firm in the world added together. They're nowhere near the size of the cultural community, which are enabled by Google, Facebook, all of that, Apple. But then you've got LVMH, you've got all the pop stars, you've got all the gaming industry, the music industry, that they dwarf all of it. Culture's the biggest thing that divides humanity. And that's why I love this whole idea of a bottle is a tokenized form of culture, it's just a very inefficient one. Because it breaks, it spoils, and there's ways that we can therefore put these two technologies together and use the story of winemaking and the story of wine, which actually is not about the wine itself. It's about everything around it. Mm-hmm. And that,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Like, I mean, David, I think I talked to you yesterday, or maybe it was the day before about this. Like, I'm in my mid-40s, and sadly, I've disconnected myself with the wine industry. When I was younger, I was far more passionate about wine. I went traveling around France specifically to go to Burgundy and Bordeaux and taste those wines, and I fell in love with those wines. But since then, that was 20 years ago, I've sort of strayed from it. I mean, I enjoy it, very disconnected, and I think I want you to articulate what are the major challenges, because that is what's so interesting about what's being proposed at dVIN. But speak to the challenges from the consumer point of view, as well as the producers, and and what specifically you're trying to address.
Sure. So, I mean, first, let's level set. Like, what is wine? And we, when you kind of look at the wine industry, sometimes it's hard to realize how big it is and how pervasive it is in the culture. The wine industry last year was $485 billion, which is, if you take the global film industry and the global television industry and the global recording industry and the global publishing industry and the global video game industry, and you put all of those together, it's not as big as the global wine industry. People spend a lot of money, a lot of their disposable income on wine. Now, most of that is, $1 a liter. And it's consumed by, Raoul at the beach in Valencia, looking out over the Mediterranean. But the wine that what we're sort of addressing with dVIN is the luxury wine market, the bottles that are average around $50, and that's about $100 billion of the wine industry. The biggest problem in that sector, the $100 billion sector, is that the consumer, the wine lover, and the winemaker are completely disconnected. When you think about when you open a great bottle of wine, it was typically made 10 years ago by somebody 10,000 miles away. Almost always, maybe less here in Australia. But it's made the distance is space and time. It really creates a disconnect between the producer and the consumer. And that disconnect creates a bunch of problems, right? One of the problems is data. They don't have any access to the kinds of data that almost every other business in the world use to make decisions. Decisions on product development, decisions on marketing, decisions on messaging, even packaging, decisions on supply chain efficiency. It's very difficult to make decisions when you have no idea who is consuming your product or where or when. Almost nearly every other industry in the world, they get really up to the minute data on how their products are being consumed. A lot of that, most of the reason for that is because consumption and purchase is kind of the same thing for most products, right? You buy a t-shirt and you wear it the next day. You buy a car and you drive it off the lot. But with wine, you'll buy it and then 8, 10 years later, you'll consume it. Or maybe someone else will consume it. Maybe your kids will consume it. Maybe you'll give it as a gift. So with great wine, that disconnect between the winemaker and the wine lover really puts the winemaker at a disadvantage. And it's very difficult for them to make their businesses more efficient. It's also very difficult for them to have leverage in the supply chain. So winemakers make, compared to other luxury products, winemakers have tiny, tiny margins. $100 bottle of wine, the winemaker's making $22 if they're lucky. A lot of times it's more like 18. So for the winemaker, not having the biggest problems are no data, no ability to acquire customers, no ability to make their businesses more efficient. And what that's resulted in is a real difficulty in addressing this generational change that's happening right now. So every industry in the world is seeing this generational change, right? People like me, consumers like me that grew up without the internet, Gen X's, boomers, to millennials and Gen Z that grew up with a phone in their pocket, right? That grew up with access to all the information in the world, that grew up with less respect for authority or experts, that grew up looking for more experiences than products, than stuff, and grew up really feeling like they wanted to do something different from the generation before them. I grew up doing everything the same way that my parents did it. I don't know if any of you have kids, but they're a totally different animal. And the wine industry in particular is terrified. Other industries that have data and connectivity to the customer, they're able to adapt. But in the wine industry, they just don't know how to reach the next generation. And what we're doing at dVIN, we hope, is building a bridge to the next generation. You want to talk about consumers as well?
Yeah.
So from a consumer standpoint, say it again?
So consumer, but also the aspiring investor.
Sure. So on the consumer side, and again, one of the reasons that you're seeing this big generational change is that wine is a completely opaque marketplace, right? Partially, that's because it's so atomized. There are, in the luxury wine industry, there's about 30,000 independent producers and about 10 million independent middlemen. And when you think about it, that makes sense, right? If you're buying a bottle of Yellowtail, you're buying it at the grocery store. But if you're buying a $50 bottle of wine, you're probably buying it at an independent bottle shop, or you're buying it at a small independent restaurant. And what that means is that there's no connectivity, really. You know, the big grocery store chains, they've got data connectivity with the big distributors who have connectivity with the big producers. But the little independent shops, there's no connectivity up and down the supply chain, which means there's a lot of opacity in the market. There's no real transparency. In fact, it's one of the least transparent products in the world. Now, that has created some interesting opportunities in the investment grade wine space, which is about a $250 billion asset class, big asset class. But it doesn't really share any of the same benefits as other investment grade, alternative investments, right? You can't, for example, there's no real price transparency or price discovery. How do you know what a bottle of wine is supposed to cost? There's not enough liquidity in the market for you to really figure out what a bottle is supposed to cost. You can't leverage it. You can't borrow against your wine collection. In a lot of cases, most places in the world, you can't even insure your wine collection. If you have a $500,000 investment grade wine collection, you can't get insurance for it, really. Maybe there's a couple of carriers where you can get like a special policy, but for the most part, it's very, very difficult. And what that's created is an investment class that only people like Jack can participate in, right? Like most normal people, and I challenge anybody in the room, right? If you wanted to invest $100,000 in real estate or stocks or bonds or gold or Bitcoin or I don't know, what's the latest shitcoin on Solana? If any of you wanted to invest $100,000 in any of those assets, you could do it in 10 minutes on your phone. But if you wanted to invest $100,000 in wine,
I'll give you a number.
you could call Jack. But it would probably, no kidding, it would probably take you a week to be able to kind of figure out how pricing works, to figure out how access works, to probably find someone that you trust that can give you advice and maybe give you an in into the marketplace. And that's kind of created this very small world of investors in investment grade wine, and we think there's a really interesting opportunity to open that aperture by introducing more transparency into the marketplace.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we're going to get to the specifics of what dVIN's doing, but I thought before we do, I remember, again, from a conversation that we've had previously, your insights into other industries that have successfully implemented blockchain. And we'll get to the details of it because I know from most people who haven't heard the story, it's conceptual at this point. But what I found interesting from that conversation, David, was that blockchain's already been implemented in the supply chains of other industries. It's just that we haven't really heard about it. And there's only, okay, granted, maybe only a few, but there's already been use cases. So are you able to just share those specific details of industries where it's already in practice, it's already being used?
So I'll give you one that's really interesting, which is the diamond industry. So in 2017, De Beers commissioned a private blockchain to figure out a way to put all diamonds on chain. And it took a couple of years. Well, actually, they did it in 2015, and it took a couple of years. But in 2017, the Tracer blockchain was launched, and then De Beers kind of gave it away to the entire diamond industry. Because what they figured out is, they knew how to build a blockchain, but what they couldn't figure out is how do we identify the individual diamonds. And over time, what they figured out is that if you put a diamond under UV light, even if it's been cut, even if it's been crushed, it has a unique signature. So you're able to, without any kind of tag or without doing anything to that diamond, you can identify a diamond. And so they started in 2017 cataloging every commercial diamond in the world. And what that's done is it's had some really interesting effects. One of the most interesting is it completely eradicated blood diamonds. So you've all heard of blood diamonds. They, as of, within the last few years, no commercial retailer in the world will sell a diamond that can't be traced all the way back to the mine. And that's all done on chain. Super interesting. It had a knock-on effect, which is it also really pretty much eliminated commercial theft. It used to be, stealing a diamond from your grandmother's jewelry drawer is one thing, but most diamond theft is done at the commercial level, right? It's stealing thousands of diamonds when they're en route from one place to another. But you can't do that anymore because those diamonds, you now know almost every diamond that's in circulation in the world today. You know who owns it. You just have to shine it under UV light. You look it up on the Tracer blockchain, and you know who owns that particular individual diamond. So there's been it's really had some really interesting and positive effects on the global diamond industry. And we see other opportunities pop up like that all the time.
Yeah, so look, let's talk about tokenization of real-world assets. It's been the buzzword of the last 2 years, right? It's the theme that's coming, that's going to unlock all this value for blockchains. And I don't know about you, Raoul, but I whenever the World Economic Forum speaks, I tend to listen. They're such sages over there at the World Economic Forum, Mr. Klaus and his friends. They've published research papers that have claimed that, or forecasted that we'll probably see about $20 trillion of value on blockchains by 2027. But those numbers sort of vary, but I think there's a consensus that we're going to get to somewhere around 20 to 30 trillion in the next sort of 10 years. And I wanted to get, you've just explained a little bit about your thesis, and it was interesting because you were talking about the societal or cultural value in tokenization being larger than the financial market. So you've already sort of somewhat answered the question I'm about to ask, but maybe lay out your thesis here. Are we crossing the threshold now where this is moving from a reality to something real? How big is it going to be, and how does everyone play that theme?
Yeah, so like Dave said, I found out something really interesting. Pierre and myself were in a meeting from my colleague from Expam. We were in a meeting in Switzerland with Louis Dreyfus, largest commodity trading firm in the world, the head of agricultural commodities. And she's an investor in the fund. And I said, you guys should be using this, right? Within the commodity industry. She goes, what do you mean we should be? We've been doing it for the last 5 years. Same sort of thing as diamonds. Like, what are you doing? She goes, well, we've got all the letters of credit, all of the insurances, all of the shipping contracts, and all of the crop identifiers, and all of the agricultural commodity producers are all using this blockchain. Like, why don't we know about this stuff? So it's already happening. And the people who need it the fastest are doing it. The financial industry is slow because just by nature of what it does. And to be fair, blockchain technology was not ready, still not ready for the speed and scale. The ASX here in Australia tried, they gave up. They'll come back. But when you look at the financial side, which is how I first came into this, I thought all of this needs to be tokenized, we need recorded ownership, because none of us actually owns anything. When you get to What is an NFT? Well, it's an individual contract. What is a derivative? It's an individual contract, particularly OTC derivatives. Well, once you look at that, it's a $1.4 quadrillion industry. And then you look at settlement and clearing. These are all in the quadrillions. But their use of tokens on the chain or the slots on the chain are not going to be that intensive because I think it's going to be about small transactions of vast size. I don't know. But you and I have been looking at for a while is how do you accrue value to the chain? Do rapid, small financial transactions do that? Or does it need to be something different? So that's part of it. But then you think about the tokenization of culture and brand and what we're seeing, what's really happening in the industry. The industry is doing culture much faster than it's doing anything else. Real world assets have been slow to come. So I think it all comes together. So when I just extrapolate that log trend, I just think they're wildly wrong in their numbers. It just looks like 100 trillion's a shoe-in for 2032, 2032, 2034. Okay, so and this is why I get so interested in this, because I like to dumb it down to its simpler essence so you can explain it to somebody in the street. It's like, this is going from 2.5 trillion to 100 trillion. That's $97.5 trillion of wealth is going to get created within figuring out this. And then that doesn't include the efficiencies that drives through every single component part. Like the wine industry, almost every cultural industry has middlemen taking 80%. The music industry, all of this stuff, the wine industry, they're all the same. And we can take back 50% of that, maybe more. Okay, that trap value is huge. And then just the stuff like, Drew had worked on and others is just getting the financial system to operate faster, just untraps capital that just gets stuck in a settlement system. Even at T+1, when we're at instant settlement, it's crazy.
Yeah, and it's not like we need productivity, right? I mean, we don't have some sort of demographic problem.
No, we're booming. It's boom times for everybody. There's no debt.
Okay, so we might show a slide here. So this is obviously on the theme we've just been talking about. So things are moving in this direction, although to Raoul's point, it's been rather slow, but it's starting to happen. So this is just a chart I thought was the most interesting because we all know that there's, quite frankly, a ton of fiat-backed stablecoins on chain already, so 130 billion, give or take. But what's interesting is what's happening in the tokenized treasury market. So start of 2023, it was 100 million. It's now at 1.5. It was, 600 million at the start of the year. BlackRock are in there. They now own, or they possess 1/3 of that market cap or that value on chain. And obviously we know who BlackRock are and really where they'll probably take things. So it is definitely starting to happen. But if we could just move to the next slide, I did a little bit of research. So I looked at the wine industry or the wine market, the luxury wine market, or this might be really the investment grade market, right, David?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an index that tracks it. Maybe you can speak to this because I thought it was interesting because when I look at this and, there wasn't a time series, I didn't get my hands on the data. I have to subscribe for that data. I decided not to do it, but I just did some back of the envelope. A bit late now, but but back of the envelope, 8.5%, S&P 500.
Doesn't that look like another number that you know of? 8%.
Maybe US equities?
No, the debasement, that's the global liquidity number.
There you go.
What is wine? A store of value. That live X is the store of value of wine. It grows at the same price as global liquidity, which is the same as the S&P 500.
Debasement hedge.
It's a debasement hedge, which is why rich people own fine wines.
But you know what the other fascinating thing about this was? When you look at that chart, the thing that strikes me is that it's done that return with a lot less volatility. Is that on? Yeah. So a lot less volatility. Yeah.
Risk adjusted.
I'm looking at that going, okay, so it's giving me S&P returns with, back of the envelope as well, it's like half the drawdowns. So that screams portfolio diversifier right there. With the upside of you can actually drink your portfolio and share it with friends and have that sort of cultural element to it as well. So it is pretty special. This has just gone out on me. We'll persevere. Thanks. So, Jana, if you could be so kind and go to the next slide. Raoul, this is for you. Like, this blew me away. Like, if you're a research nerd like me, and I know you are, look at that. You've got sectors within wine.
So it's all about taste, I'm telling you.
Well, that's not what I see in this chart. I see, there's actually trading strategies that can be deployed.
There are.
You know, you've got different profiles here. Like equities and crypto, they have market sectors. And you play those market sectors or subsectors to generate alpha. And so there's opportunity in this market. So I just thought it was interesting because I was completely oblivious. I mean, obviously there's different categories, but was actually being tracked as an index. I'm not having much luck here. So Raoul, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Like, if that's where we are today in this primitive world of wine, which is completely atomized, needs to come into the 21st century, and let's just say what David is proposing really takes off, what's going to happen to the wine industry because I would say it's not really an asset class, it's like a collectible that's on the verge of being an asset class. It just needs certain characteristics to be a legitimate asset class. So do you have any thoughts about, where this could all lead in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
I think the most important thing for me within this is it's all well and good for a bunch of us to own fine wines. And we can make the returns. I've actually never sold a bottle of wine. So I buy nice wine and then just drink it. Bursting's the same. So it's not really an investment, but let's pretend it is. Let's pretend we had the option of selling our wines. Rich people can do this. But when you tokenize wine, everybody can do this. Right? It's the same idea with tokenizing real estate, tokenizing art. That's what NFTs are. People can tokenize assets that you could never afford to own. And that's really important. When you've got an asset that does well, with low volatility, so risk-adjusted returns, and I haven't done the numbers because we didn't pay for the numbers either, we got these, but like you, eyeballing that, it's a pretty decent investment, which is why Dave's made a career out of it. Jack has lost all the money trying to just build businesses in it, but it is a great, really interesting industry from a number of perspectives. Now, that performance, if you think about it, there's another weird thing that happens in wine. It's just like art. The artist does it, they sell it at their one price, let's call it $100 a bottle, and they never capture any of the upside ever again. So if they've created a masterpiece and you don't really know it, NFT art, you've got royalties you can build that every time it changes hands. Why should a winemaker not have royalties if they've made a masterpiece? There's so many things that can happen with this over time that it's fascinating, and it's a industry where just from a standard kind of marketing, know your customer, all of that, it's a mess. But we can tokenize the wine itself as an asset class. LiveX, well, that should be in a token. We should be able to trade that. I want to trade Burgundy versus Champagne. It's that kind of stuff. So yeah, like you, I'd look at something like that and it's something interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if yes, it's actually working again. Okay, great. Look, on that, so what you're talking about is technology that can show chain of custody, provenance, ownership. So David, I'm going to pass it back to you. I want you to go into the details. How does it actually work? Like, how do you build trust with the technology that you're providing to give this nascent asset class, collectible, whatever you want to call it, proper asset class status, and give back to the producers, what they actually deserve?
Sure. So, when we started this journey, I was the tech guy for the investment grade wine industry. When people had technical questions, they would call me. And when I started getting phone calls about blockchain projects, we built a little working group, and that working group turned into dVIN, decentralized wine. And then we started we didn't look to build a blockchain company. What we looked to do was solve problems. And what we found was that the biggest problem in the wine industry, or actually the biggest solution that solved lots of individual problems was creating a deed of ownership over a bottle. That one kind of unit. How do you, if you create a deed of ownership over a bottle of wine, we call it a digital cork. It's a specialized NFT that does a bunch of different things. First, there's a creative element that tells a story. There's a bunch of metadata that tells you everything you need to know about that particular bottle. That's all stored on chain. And there's chain of ownership, right? All of the kind of basic things that you would have for any NFT, whether it's a digital asset or a digital twin for a physical asset. But for wine, we needed a bunch of kind of specialized things in order to make that digital cork valuable. One of those things is chain of custody. Custody, really important in wine because you need to know if that wine has been stored, for example, at a bonded warehouse that has perfect climate, perfect temperature, perfect humidity, or in the back of Raoul's car in Valencia, right? You're going to pay a lot more for the one that was stored at a bonded warehouse. So chain of custody, really important. So we figured out a way to track chain of custody right now on a permission basis, and over time, as you start seeing dPIN networks like Helium and on-bottle technology, we're talking to a company now that puts an RFID ribbon inside the cork. So when you pull the cork, it automatically alerts the blockchain that bottle's been opened. So being able to track wine through the supply chain and like knowing where that bottle is and how it's being stored and how it's being transported is super important for any kind of secondary marketplace. There's also provenance, right? We have a couple of different levels of provenance. One is the top level, obviously, is you can trace that bottle all the way back to the winemaker. That's probably the best level. Second best is you can trace it back to a trusted third party like, Sotheby's or Berry Brothers, a bonded warehouse of some sort. And then obviously the lowest level is, private seller or the back of Raoul's car. That's the lowest level of provenance. We started implementing anti-fraud and anti-counterfeit. I know Australia knows an awful lot about counterfeit wines. We work with the folks at Treasury at Penfolds a lot, and having a conversation with Tom King, the CEO of Penfolds, earlier this year, and he said that when they cut off trade to China, it was a little bit of a blessing because at that time they thought that there was more counterfeit Penfolds in China than there was real Penfolds. So it's a really big problem in the industry. If you can do all of those things, if you can have anti-fraud, anti-counterfeit protections, if you can have chain of custody and provenance, and if you're on chain, so now you not only have chain of ownership, but you can look at pricing. You can have transparent pricing across the blockchain. Now all of a sudden it starts to feel like an asset. Now it's something, it's easy to insure. It's something that perhaps you can get some leverage and borrow against. But more importantly, it creates access for a normal investor to be able to look at price history, look at comps, and be able to make an informed and reasonable decision about investing in whether it's a fractionalized pool of wines or an individual bottle. And one of the things that we think is super interesting about tokenizing is not necessarily taking the existing, let's call it $250 billion asset class and tokenizing that, but looking at the marketplace and saying, hey, some of those wines that are investment grade today, 10 years ago weren't investment grade, right? 20 years ago, they were, $30, $40 a bottle, but they've since been discovered and now they're investment grade. We may show you a little treat later if we've got time, and we can kind of dig into that piece a little bit more. But think about that, now that we've tokenized it, and anyone in this room can invest $100,000 with a tap of your phone, with real price information. And now you have the ability to maybe invest in the same way that that you invest in other alternative assets. We look at the younger generation who all say, they're priced out of the real estate market. They feel like the equities markets are all rigged. So they're looking for alternative investments, whether it's, meme stocks or shitcoins, right? Where they feel like they have, it's a cool and fun group experience that they're doing. It's asymmetrical information, and they're tapping into a market where the boomers and the hedge fund guys can't really access. That's why it's interesting and fun for them, and also it gives them the ability to get real returns. Well, wine is something pretty interesting in that respect, right? You can find things that other people don't know about. You can play in an arena where the big guys can't play. There's not enough liquidity. There's not enough room for the big guys to come in and play in that space. So I think there's a real opportunity to take that $250 billion asset class, open it up to the next generation of investors, and maybe 5 or 10 exit.
So are things like Whispering Angel not just meme wines?
Could be, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
There's just certain wines that catch hold because.
Yeah.
And people will drive that. Because if they think they can participate in it to make a wine the wine of the summer, there's no difference, right? It's just culture in a bottle.
Culture in a bottle. Yeah.
So it's almost like the crypto market. I mean, the big players weren't there at the start. That's right. So it's an opportunity. I think, okay, so look, you've obviously launching in the third quarter of this year.
Yeah.
Do you want to just explain, which platform are you using and sure. What that looks like?
So I talked a bit about the digital cork. We've actually launched two different products, and we're launching a third. The first product is the digital cork. We kind of talked about that. The other thing is, wine, unlike other real world assets, someday, as Raoul was saying, if you're lucky, you get to drink it. So we built a kind of interesting mechanism for that right now is voluntary and incentivized, but over time will be mechanized, where when you open the bottle, the consumer has the ability to burn the digital cork in exchange for another token that has rewards and status attached to it. So imagine, we call it a tasting token, but imagine collecting, 30 tasting tokens for Chateau Margaux, and now you're, Grand Cru status at Chateau Margaux. They take you in the back door when you go there and you do a barrel tasting. Maybe you get invited to winemaker dinners. More importantly, maybe you get access to allocations that you wouldn't normally get access to. It's a way for Chateau Margaux to reward their best customers. What we're launching in September is VinCoin, which is the first native token that's built specifically for the wine industry. And in phase one, really serves as a loyalty token. So the winemaker attaches VinCoin to the bottle. The bottle makes its way through the supply chain. When the consumer opens the bottle, that's when they can claim the VinCoin. And then they can use that to go and buy more wine, pay for experiences, or maybe shop at, use their loyalty tokens to shop at some other luxury goods or services provider that is interested in talking to people that like to buy $50 bottles of wine. There's a lot of them. And then those VinCoin make their way back to the winemaker attaches it to the next bottle, and you've got an economy. That's what we're launching in September. We're launching it on Solana. We're actually launching it at Breakpoint on stage in September. You're all invited to come. It's going to be a lot of fun. And next week, we're actually putting 4,000 bottles of grower champagne on a boat. And everyone that comes to Solana Breakpoint every attendee is going to get a bottle of champagne with their airdrop of VinCoin attached to it. We're pretty excited about that. It's going to be a really fun launch. We're working with a lot of other communities inside of Solana as well. we got a really big bear hug from the community, and we really enjoy that. But that's launching in September, and that's kind of what we're running, full speed against right now.
Awesome. So, Raoul, I mean, once this launches, like it's basically a native token for the wine industry, for the consumer experience that's feeding back to the producers. Do you have any thoughts around like where this could potentially go in terms of like an ecosystem? Because once you've got that and you've got the incentives in place, and say it's built on on Solana and maybe it goes multi-chain, like where does this go eventually?
David and I have been talking about this. I mean, there's a lot of ways this goes, whether it's for stock management for the entire industry. Everyone has to manage inventories. Inventories in wine are complicated because they spoil if you're not careful. You don't know where it's being stored. You don't get to store your inventory in Berry Brothers if you're shipping it to Chinese hotels, right? So there's a lot of things that can be done with inventory management. So the whole supply chain thing gets changed, but also having that direct relationship between winemaker. We're all used to having a direct relationship with retailers where we just buy stuff online and it happens. It becomes much closer to that. Then you get community on top. So if you think of them, the community is tasting the wines, they're opening the wines, they're making comments. So the dVIN community is then telling you what wines it likes. Okay, that creates power for the winemakers, power for the community. The hive mind springs into, it's the same thing as Real Vision, right? It's what you give a community, you give it a network, you get everybody incentivized to grow that network, and out comes magic.
Awesome.
And there's actually some pretty interesting, very boring. Whenever I talk to a group like this, I say, I'm going to tell you about the most boring blockchain project in the world. When I talk to wine people, I say it's the most exciting most exciting wine project in the world. But it's a very boring blockchain project. But that said, it's also very big, right? When we talk about that $100 billion wine industry, it's unique among industries because the average transaction is a little winemaker in Burgundy selling 5 cases of wine to a little importer in Oslo. And that happens tens of millions of times a year all over the world. Now that little transaction, that's maybe a $2,000 US to $3,000 US transaction, but it has a bunch of horrible inefficiencies. One is counterparty risk. How do I know you're going to send me the wine? How do I know you're going to pay me the money? These are they're not Fortune 500 companies, they're 2 little companies. The importer was probably founded 3 days ago. That's just what happens in the wine industry. So that counterparty risk really creates issues. There's also cross-border settlement. There's also terrible FX. You're paying the worst wire transfer fees. You're getting the worst FX rates. We did a study with Deloitte last year. We think that $6.10 of every $50 bottle of wine is going to the banks, 12.5%. We think we can do better. And that's a really interesting, tangible effect that can happen in the industry that we're really excited about.
Awesome. Okay, so look, we're just about to wrap up. I thought how we'd finish is maybe a quick fire round. Questions?
Great.
Okay, there's going to have to be some shilling here, boys. Okay?
Ready.
Favorite wine region? Raoul.
Rioja.
David.
Prira.
Spain.
I know very little, so I'm not going to comment. Favorite midwinter wine? Raoul, because you don't experience winters.
Midwinter wine in the Caribbean is like your Christmas champagne. No, it depends where I am. The wine of the region is always the best, particularly in winter. So if I'm in Australia, I want to be drinking Aussie wines.
Okay, I was going to come to that question. What about midsummer, given that that's you all the time? Raoul, before you.
Summer, Albarino. Albarino all day.
Raoul?
White Burgundy all day. Or champagne. Those 2 for me.
There you go.
David, what's Albarino?
Thank you for
Albarino's
asking that question.
It's okay. It's a grape varietal from kind of northwestern Spain, up just west of Rioja. I think they might make it in a couple other places, but it's not common around the world. But for me, it's like crispy, crunchy, really dry and light but flavorful at the same time. It's just my favorite. It's my favorite white wine grape.
It's got the salt of the sea air up there and stuff like that. It's fantastic. Shellfish. If you think of shellfish, what's the perfect wine? It's Albarino.
And I live in Barcelona, so all summer long we're eating shellfish.
Okay, last question. This is my question. As an aspiring investor, which wine should I buy?
So I'm going to say the same thing that I tell everybody, is the most underpriced fine wine in the world is Rioja from Spain. It is the most underpriced. You can buy...
Why is the meme not working?
Robert Parker didn't like it. So he didn't understand these 12%, 11.5% alcohol wines that last for 70 years. They're immortal. What he wanted was a fruit blonde with blackcurrant and alcohol. It's like the American trick of adding sugar and salt to everything. And what happened was, and it has this oakiness because it's oak barrels, it's a particular way it's made. He didn't like it. So what you found is wine that is actually remarkably similar to Burgundy, bottles in Burgundy that would trade at $10,000 a bottle. The equivalent would be like a 1970 Tondonia, which the equivalent in Burgundy, actually maybe more, maybe $20,000, trades for $300. That's insane.
This one person's had such a massive impact on...
Yeah, there's a whole amazing film about this called Mundo Vino that is well worth watching to understand. It wasn't his fault. He didn't mean to do it. It just happened. And Americans saw this point scoring system, so it kind of made it easy for them.
Became a meme.
Yeah, it became a meme. So then they're like, oh, Robert Parker gave it this. It made it easy for them to understand. And then they adopted his palate because he said this is 98 out of 100. So they went, oh, it's a 98 out of 100. We like these wines. And it was the behavioral adaptation of the entire American wine market. And then it went global. And only a few vineyards held out. One of the reasons I drink a lot of champagne is because champagne can only be made in a certain way. So it was impenetrable to Robert Parker. Nothing he could do could change the rule of champagne.
Phenomenal. How easily are we persuaded as humans? David?
So I'm gonna say Barolo. So find some great vineyards from Barolo. And the reason why is not necessarily because they're the most underpriced, but it's because they're the most constrained with regards to scarcity. You can't. There's no more land available in Barolo, so you can't really expand your vineyard. It's very tightly controlled how much wine you can make in each plot, and more importantly, in Barolo you have to keep your wine in barrel for 4 years. You have to keep it on bottle for 2 years. So there's this kind of native staking program that's regulatory. That's regulatory.
And that's a really important point for me. And I don't know if this bears it out, but really, long-term time horizon in wine is what creates all the value. So you might get wines that come out that are sold reasonably expensively, but they don't increase in value much over time because they don't actually age well. The Parkerization of wine is actually a premature aging of wine. So Barolo is immortal. It's like Rioja, it's immortal. Yeah. Or good Bordeaux, good Burgundy, these things are immortal. So they tend to have value over time. So if you can find a decent Barolo and it's not too expensive, or a Rioja that's young now, might cost you $50, chances are it's worth a lot more in the future. Now, you'll end up drinking it, so it means nothing. So what I do is I just discount all of the wine I ever buy. And I usually, or haven't bought much recently, but I'd buy it pretty young and store it. And I would forget what I paid on my credit card. And then when you get to open it, and it's now a $1,000 bottle because you've chosen really well, you have zero wine guilt because you just say, well, it's zero. It cost me nothing because I paid for it 10 years ago. Jack, you're looking the same way. You have to write it off in your head. If not, you never open a bottle of wine that you bought, or you sell it.
Fantastic consumption strategy there. Look, gentlemen, maybe just last comments if you want to make any before we wrap up. But we very much appreciate you both being here today and putting on this event. Raoul, David, do you want to say anything more?
I want to say thank you. You've been an amazing host. You're going to do this more often.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie.
Yeah.
Like really, really good
No,
work.
honestly, brilliant.
Thank you.
I tend to blush, but I'm not blushing as much as Raoul about the underpants story, so that's not too bad. In fact, that's going to be everything that you've said, David, is in one ear, out the other. All I've got is this visual. And on that note, we'll leave it there. To the Real Vision community and everyone, there is drinks and festivities going on all afternoon and this evening. We really look forward to seeing you all there, so thank you very much.
All right, that's a wrap on this special edition of Wine and Web 3 with Real Vision. Huge thanks to Dave, Raoul, and Jamie for a conversation that continues to age well, proof that some ideas really are built to last. If you got something out of this episode, an insight, a fresh take, a new lens on RWAs, go ahead and follow the show, smash that subscribe button, and maybe even leave a quick review. It helps more curious minds discover how Wine and Web 3 are rewriting the rules of value. You can find us on socials under dVIN Labs, that's dVIN Labs, Labs, or on our website at dvinlabs.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious and keep sipping the good stuff. Cheers.